My name is Elise Warren, and I thought my family loved me, until they stole everything my grandfather left for me. He raised me when my parents were too busy. He taught me how to work with my hands, how to keep promises, how to stay kind even when the world wasn't. When he passed, they said there was nothing left. Just a casual shrug from my uncle, a forced smile from my mother, and a fake sympathy card from my brother that read, "Sorry it didn't work out." Grandpa must have changed his mind. I wanted to believe them, but I knew better. They were lying. The inheritance was supposed to change my life. Instead, it vanished overnight. No answers, no records, just silence. I tried asking questions. I tried calling lawyers. I even dug through probate court filings myself. Nothing. They closed every door. For 6 months, I lived in a one-bedroom apartment over a diner kitchen, listening to the clatter of plates at 2 a.m., wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, one morning, someone knocked on my door. He wore a gray suit, carried a leather briefcase, and said 6 words that changed everything, "Miss Warren. I'm the executor of the real will." What he told me next, it broke everything wide open. And by the end of this story, the people who betrayed me would wish they'd never touched what was mine. The day they read the will, I showed up in black slacks and a pressed shirt. Everyone else dressed like they were headed to brunch. My cousin Mitchell was laughing in the corner, phone in hand. His fiancée nudged him. "If it's what we think it is, we could go lakefront." Aunt Renee had a champagne bottle half visible in her tote. Even my brother, who barely spoke to Grandpa, looked smug. And my mother, she didn't look at me once. The lawyer, not Grandpa's longtime attorney, someone new, handed out sealed envelopes. I opened mine slowly. Blank. A single blank sheet of paper. No check, no letter, no explanation. I stared at it like it might shift and reveal something. Anything. Mitchell broke the silence. $150,000, baby." He high-fived my brother across the table. Renee squealed. Someone popped the champagne, and I was just sitting there. I leaned toward the lawyer. "There's nothing in here," I said. She glanced down, then replied evenly. "Your grandfather revised the will shortly before his death. According to the version filed, your portion was rescinded." Rescinded. My mother finally turned toward me with a soft, syrupy voice. "Sweetheart, don't take it personally. Maybe he thought you didn't need it." Didn't need it. I walked out without another word. I didn't want them to see my hands shaking. That night, I sat in my car and stared at the dashboard until morning. Not a single message from anyone. No apology, no explanation. Just silence. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. I dug up old voicemails from Grandpa, birthday calls, long chats, his laugh. Nothing in his voice ever hinted at betrayal. He used to tell me, "If things ever go sideways, you hold the line, Elise. You're the only one I trust." But when it mattered, there was no line, no trust, no inheritance, nothing. I tried contacting the attorney listed on the envelope. Number disconnected. Email bounced. When I pulled public records, I found something worse. Grandpa's usual lawyer had retired suddenly. The will had been filed by someone else entirely, a man with no record of working with my grandfather before. When I asked about the original document, I was told that's sealed under court order. You're not a listed beneficiary. I wasn't just written out, I was erased. Meanwhile, Mitchell posted Instagram stories from a new house with granite counters and a pool. My brother flashed a watch that cost more than my student debt. And my mother, she sent me a single text. "Don't stir up trouble, Elise. Let it go. Let it go." I was working 12-hour shifts and skipping meals, and somehow they expected me to believe this was all fair. Something was wrong, not just morally, legally. I didn't know what yet, but I knew one thing: they weren't afraid of what I'd lost. They were afraid of what I might find. It happened on a Monday. Rain sliding down the kitchen window, bills stacked by the sink. I was slicing onions for a soup I couldn't afford meat for when the knock came. 3 short, deliberate raps. I wiped my hands and opened the door. He stood there in a charcoal gray suit. Not young, not old, clean-shaven, neatly pressed. He held a leather briefcase, and something in his eyes told me this wasn't a sales pitch. Miss Elise Warren, I nodded. My name is John Alcott. I'm the court-appointed executor of Henry Warren's sealed will. My mouth went dry. I stared at him, not moving, not speaking. Because I'd heard that name, Executor, but not in connection to anything real. Not since they told me the inheritance was gone. You might want to sit down, he added. This isn't going to be a quick conversation. I led him inside. He didn't comment on the peeling linoleum or the broken cabinet handle. He simply sat, opened his briefcase, and placed 2 documents on the table. One was stamped and sealed with the county court's insignia. The other, I recognized immediately. It was the document they'd read at the firm. The fake one. What is this? I whispered. He tapped the county-stamped one. This is your grandfather's final court-registered will, signed, witnessed, and sealed 6 weeks before his death. I've been authorized to execute it now that several irregularities came to light. I swallowed hard. Irregularities. He nodded slowly. Someone filed a forged version, with a falsified signature and notarization. That's the one your family received and read aloud. I stared down at the fake will. It looked so official, so final. And yet it was nothing more than a cover story. They told me there was nothing I said. I know, he replied. That's why I'm here. He opened a folder and showed me a list of asset transfers, properties, investment accounts, antique sales. Every item was marked withheld, blocked, in violation. I could hardly breathe. It was all still there. So, the inheritance, I asked, voice barely audible. He gave a small, measured smile. Very much intact. And under the law, you were never removed. For a moment, I couldn't move. Because everything I had accepted as a loss, my future, my dignity, my grandfather's love, wasn't gone. It had just been buried. Deliberately. By people who shared my last name. John Alcott didn't speak like a lawyer. He spoke like someone used to being ignored until the last moment, and then turning everything upside down. He laid out the timeline like a puzzle already solved. 6 weeks before my grandfather died, he had filed a sealed will through a private court channel, a method used when beneficiaries are likely to face harassment or intimidation. Your grandfather knew someone would try to alter his intentions, John said, so he made sure the truth couldn't be tampered with. In that sealed will, I was left 42% of the estate. 42. It wasn't just money. It was land, stock, a house, and a family trust account tied to wartime patents I didn't even know he owned. The rest had been divided between my cousins, a small donation to a veterans relief fund, and one final clause: Elise Warren shall inherit the controlling stake in Warren Antiques and Holdings. I blinked. The antique business had been sold off, I thought. Liquidated. No, John corrected. It was listed as liquidated in a falsified document. But your grandfather never signed those transfer papers. That signature was copied. Poorly. He handed me a photograph. It was a copy of a notary stamp, the same stamp used on the forged will. Except, the woman listed as the notary. She died 2 years before the will was supposedly signed. The room went quiet. We believe the forgery was arranged internally, John said calmly, by someone with access to your grandfather's personal records, medical appointments, signatures, routine banking patterns. I didn't need to ask who. The image came to me without invitation, my mother holding Grandpa's checkbook while he recovered from surgery, my uncle always offering to help with the paperwork, and my brother standing silently behind them, knowing watching. The document they read at the law firm wasn't a mistake. It was an ambush, a cold-blooded maneuver to push me out quietly permanently. Why didn't you come sooner? I asked. John's expression tightened. I was denied access. The court was notified the will had already been executed. By the time we cross-verified the documents, months had passed. But now that the fraud has been identified, he slid over a sealed envelope. This is your formal reinstatement. You are the primary beneficiary, Elise, and I've already filed a motion to freeze all transferred assets pending full review. Everything stopped in that moment. The yacht Mitchell bragged about, the Iceland vacation my aunt took to grieve my brother's $90,000 crypto venture, all of it stolen on borrowed time. I sat there in silence, not triumphant, not angry, just hollow, because you grow up thinking betrayal will come like a scream. But sometimes it walks in wearing your family's perfume, smiles with your mother's face, and calls you sweetheart as it empties your future. John stood up to leave. They'll be notified within 48 hours, he said. Expect noise. I asked quietly, what happens if they deny it? He paused at the door. Then we go to court. And this time, they won't be the ones holding the microphone. The notice from the court went out on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Mitchell left 12 voicemails, most of them incoherent. His voice cracked between outrage and panic, like someone watching their house catch fire with all the doors locked. Aunt Renee sent a long, rambling text. It started with, "We didn't know," shifted into, "It wasn't our decision," and ended with, "Don't do anything you'll regret." And my mother, she didn't call. She came in person. She stood on my porch, holding a thermos and wearing pearls, her hands trembling just enough to look human. Her smile was the same one she used to wear at PTA meetings, polished, performative, and meaningless. "Elise," she said through the screen door, "we should talk. We're still family." I didn't open the door. John stood behind me in the hallway and spoke in a level voice, his words stripped of all sentiment. "Don't engage. The investigation is open now." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Faster than I expected. Faster than they could prepare for. Warren Antiques was placed under temporary court supervision. The family trust was frozen, its disbursements halted. And I was granted a protective order, not from journalists or creditors, but from my own relatives. Mitchell tried to move funds from an offshore account. The bank flagged it before the wire went through. My uncle claimed he had been manipulated, but his email history told a different story. In one message, he corresponded directly with someone known for selling forged notary seals. It was all right there, names, dates, the paper trail of betrayal. Then came the twist I never saw coming. John requested access to a secondary vault listed under my grandfather's name, a safe deposit box that hadn't been touched in over a year. It was registered in my grandfather's own handwriting. When the box was opened at First Fidelity Bank, 3 things were inside: a signed copy of the handwritten will, a sealed letter addressed to me, and a flash drive. John handed me the envelope privately. I opened it alone that night. The letter was dated 6 weeks before Grandpa died. His handwriting was familiar, firm, but slanted like always. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means they did exactly what I feared." He wrote about the way he'd watched them over the years, circling his estate like scavengers. He wrote about the meals we shared, the afternoons I helped him shave, the nights I sat with him, while he forgot names and remembered wars. And then he wrote, "You never asked me for a thing. That's why I left you the key. To the trust. To the land. To everything they'll try to fake their way into." I didn't cry because of the money. I cried because it meant I hadn't imagined it. I had mattered to him. They just wanted me to doubt that until I disappeared. The flash drive held recordings. Conversations. One was between my uncle and someone labeled consultant. They discussed how to hide transfers and how to forge competency declarations to make it look like Grandpa had lost control of his faculties. It wasn't just theft, it was methodical, deliberate erasure. John submitted the recordings to the court the next day. That was when everything shifted. What began as a probate dispute turned into something heavier. Legal, criminal, forgery, fraud, conspiracy. 3 weeks later, I walked into probate court as someone entirely different from the girl who'd sat silently at the fake will reading. I was calm, present, ready. My mother sat in the gallery, her hands white-knuckled around her pearls. My brother wouldn't look at me. Mitchell started crying before the judge entered the room. The court was cold, neutral, but I wasn't. I didn't need to speak much. John handled the arguments. The documentation spoke for itself. The paper trail was louder than any of their voices. And when the judge formally reinstated the original sealed will, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled. Quietly. As I turned to leave the courtroom, John caught up with me in the hallway and handed me a folded note. "There's one more thing," he said. Your grandfather created a private designation not legally binding, but personally significant. It names a successor trustee for the foundation accounts tied to his military patents. I unfolded the paper. It was brief. 4 words. Written in clean black ink. Elise Warren, sole trustee. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. They had tried to cut me out. Instead, I had become the one name they couldn't escape. The silence after the ruling was its own kind of verdict. My family, once so loud with opinions and justifications, vanished. No more voicemails, no more lectures about gratitude, just absence, and I welcomed it. Mitchell lost the house first, then the car, then the carefully curated online image of success. His profile picture disappeared, replaced by a blank icon. Aunt Renee was removed from 2 nonprofit boards within days of the fraud becoming public. Her name, once printed on charity brochures, stopped showing up entirely. My uncle's law license was suspended pending investigation into fiduciary misconduct. He issued a statement about being misled, but no one bought it. The emails said otherwise. And my mother. She never apologized, not once. She sent a final message, short and bitter. I hope you're satisfied, it read. As if telling the truth had made me cruel. But I wasn't satisfied. Not exactly. I was exhausted. I had spent nearly a year clawing through sealed doors and quiet lies. What I felt now wasn't triumph. It was stillness, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Once the court transferred control of the trust, I drove out to the land my grandfather left me. 42 acres untouched since childhood. I hadn't been back in years, but everything felt familiar. The narrow trail, the pine trees leaning slightly east, the hollow thud of my boots on the old wooden steps of the cabin. Inside, dust coated everything, but the silence was comforting. There was a photo on the mantel, me at 8, hair tangled, holding a fishing rod, beaming like I belonged. I sat down in his old chair and let myself remember the version of life that made sense. Not the boardrooms, not the probate filings, but the quiet mornings when he taught me how to hold a compass and draw maps in the dirt. I didn't cry for what they'd taken. I cried for what I'd nearly forgotten that I had mattered, that someone had seen me as worth protecting, that all along I wasn't crazy for sensing the coldness beneath their smiles. That evening, I locked the cabin and put the key in my pocket, not out of fear that anyone would steal what was inside, but because I finally understood what it meant to hold something no one else could touch. Not money, not property, memory, legacy, choice. I didn't return their calls. I didn't respond to reporters. I didn't answer when distant relatives suddenly remembered my number. They wanted access. I wanted peace. And I kept the one promise I made to myself the night John Alcott first knocked on my door. I would move forward. But not with them. Justice didn't come with applause. There was no dramatic outburst in court, no tearful confession, no final scene where they admitted they were wrong. It came quietly. Through legal filings, through signed orders, through the silence that followed when the truth settled in and no one had anywhere left to run. After everything was finalized, I didn't go looking for revenge. I didn't want it. What would I do with their apologies now, when every lie had already cost me time, energy, and something harder to name the part of me that once believed they could still change? What I needed wasn't revenge. It was recovery, dignity, truth I didn't have to beg for. For a while, I stayed on the land, repaired what needed fixing, cleaned out the cabin. I read my grandfather's journal's notes from a man who saw through the people closest to him, but still chose to hope anyway. That was his flaw, or maybe his strength. It made me think about what I inherited beyond assets or documents. I inherited a warning. That trust should be earned, not assumed. That silence can be just as violent as a slap, and that family, real family, is not defined by blood, but by behavior. I also learned that standing alone doesn't mean you're lost. Sometimes it means you're the only one not lying to yourself. For years I played along, smiled at holidays, nodded through backhanded compliments. Let myself believe that loyalty meant staying quiet while others rewrote the truth. But silence is not loyalty. Silence is complicity. And I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. What happened in court wasn't just a legal correction. It was a line in the sand. They stepped over it. I didn't. I never went back to the house where my mother used to keep my childhood photos in a box marked later. I never responded to the cousins who suddenly remembered my birthday once the trust was redistributed. I didn't block them. I didn't fight them. I just disappeared from their story. Because the one I'm writing now doesn't have space for people who needed me small to feel big. I sit on the cabin porch sometimes and wonder if they tell themselves a different version now. One where I was cruel. One where I stole what was rightfully theirs. But I don't worry about it. Not anymore. The truth has its own gravity. It doesn't need me to defend it. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: you can survive betrayal. You can rebuild from broken trust. And sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is walk away without burning anything down. They lied, forged, and manipulated, and in the end, they lost the one thing they were so desperate to control: their place in my life. I didn't win by destroying them. I won by refusing to be like them. And that will always be enough.